Well, it's been a very busy period in international politics, with the midterms in the United States putting Obama in a difficult position. There is a certain parallel here in Japan, where the government is struggling to figure out what it wants to do, both at home and abroad. China has become more provocative in its foreign policy over the last few months. And so it's kind of interesting to see the world from a different perspective, that is to say, to see how it looks from Japan. I think there has been a sort of consolidation of a more traditional framework over the last several months, which one can feel here. That is to say that during the first year of the Obama administration, when Hatayama was in office, there was a good bit of turbulence in the relationship, partly over Okinawa and the basing issue, but also questions about where Obama was headed, questions about whether Hatayama was changing in some way the U.S.-Japan relationship. And I think over the last few months, because of the perhaps more provocative behavior of China vis-a-vis the islands, vis-a-vis an unwillingness to revalue the renminbi, there I think has been a return to a more familiar U.S.-Japan alliance, plus a new change, and that has been the stop in India of President Obama, and the effort to try to create a new relationship with India as part of a strategy of bringing the United States firmly into the region, from the Korean Peninsula through Singapore and over to India, as a way of providing reassurance to the region at a time of geopolitical change. Well, I think the decline of American primacy is a steady but slow process, and that the United States will remain in a position of economic and military superiority for probably another couple of decades, but that the gap between the U.S. and China, between the U.S. and India, between the U.S. and others is closing day by day. And that's an irreversible development. But I do think that we are heading into a world in which the West, members of the broad coalition of liberal democracies emerging after World War II, that grouping of countries will not enjoy the same level of material and ideological primacy as they have for the last 50 or 60 years. And it's going to be difficult, challenging to adjust to that world. And I think rather than there being one path to modernity, the sort of liberal democratic path, there will be other paths. There will be a sort of China-Russia path, a more autocratic brand of capitalism. There will be a Latin American path, which is much more of a sort of left-wing populism. There will be a Middle East path, which will involve a much closer relationship between religion and politics than we see in the West. And so I think the world is just getting more diverse as power spreads out. And that's going to require careful management, collective management. To the degree that the U.S.-Japan alliance figures in that, I think it will be a source of stability. It's one area where, because of the rise of China, because of the geopolitical uncertainty in the region, I think the U.S.-Japan Security Alliance is probably going to remain pretty stable during this period of transition. Well, I think it should try, and it takes two to become friends, and therefore the the, the uncertainty, the challenge is, will both China and Japan decide to try to move toward partnership rather than toward competition? And right now, I would say we're somewhere in between. I think it's safe to say Japan and China are not enemies, but it's also safe to say that they are not friends that trust each other. And so right now, I think we're in one of those periods in history in which the relationship could go either way, and in which Japan has a vested interest in attempting to fashion a more cooperative relationship with China and to use the security provided by the alliance with the United States to make some gestures, to take some initiatives to improve the relationship with China, and then see what comes back. And I think that we don't know where China is headed because China doesn't know where China is headed. It's going through a period of political and economic transition which could be very smooth, it could be very positive, it could be benign. It's also going through a period of transition that could move in a more dangerous direction, with nationalism, with ambition beyond Chinese borders. But right now, I think the strategy should be engage if possible, contain if necessary. I would say focus for now more on engagement and switch to more containment only if forced to do so by China. I think what the group is doing is very important, and that is beginning to have a conversation about Japanese grand strategy for tomorrow. And I think that because of the relationship with the United States, there has been a period of stasis in Japanese foreign policy, a tendency to hold tight to the status quo. But no status quo lasts forever. And I think in light of the changes that are taking place in the world, it's very important for Japan to begin to develop a set of options for the future about its foreign policy, about its grand strategy. And my sense in the conversations with the group is that that's exactly what they're doing. They are looking beyond the status quo to develop a range of options for Japanese foreign policy to deal with what is likely to be a changing landscape in the days ahead. The main message of the book and the lecture is a hopeful one, and that is that peace does break out, and that we can look around the world and see many instances of cases in which enemies became friends. The U.S.-Japan relationship is evidence of that. And so what I want to try to do is share some ideas about how that happens, through what processes are enemies able to find their way to friendship, turn enmity into amity, to discuss what some of the main obstacles are, and to hopefully stimulate debate here in Tokyo among Japanese decision makers, broader discussion in the public about Japan's relationship with China, about options for Japanese diplomacy in moving toward a more cooperative security architecture in East Asia. And in doing so, I will say a few things about American politics, what Japanese should expect from the United States in the coming couple of years, in which, because of the Republican victory in the House and the midterms, politics in the United States are likely to be interesting, to say the least. I would say that there is no substitute for being there. I can read books about Japan. I can go to conferences about East Asian security architecture, but there really is no substitute for firsthand experiences. And I say that not just because of my trip this week to Japan, but because trips I have taken in the past to Kosovo in the Balkans, or to Moscow, or to the Middle East, have really changed the way I think about particular problems, increased my knowledge of issues many times over in ways that you simply cannot get unless you go and talk to people and see and feel and smell. And so in that sense, I think it's a very important program. My one recommendation would be to think about ways to keep the people that you bring through engaged, so that it's not just a week in Japan and sayonara. Maybe at one point you could think about having a reunion. See if you might be able to gather them for a conference, or find some other way to keep the network building, because that way I think you get better return on your investment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.